You know, chess kids, there's many ways to make a career out of chess. You could be a chess teacher. Hey, that's like me. A chess content creator. Hey, also me. You could become a grandmaster. Hey, that's not me. You could also write chess books, write chess magazine articles, so many things. But what about if you wanted to become a chess detective? What's a chess detective? Well, break out your magnifying glass, your tape measure, your fingerprint kit, because today you're going to need it. I'm going to show you a series of positions, and you're going to tell me how the how the illegal move occurred. In fact, in all of our positions today, there's some part of the chess game that is not possible, and you're going to find out who was the rule breaker. Okay, here is our first example. Take a really good look at the chess position. Looks pretty normal, doesn't it? Yeah, it looks pretty normal to me too. But I've put in a secret clue that you have to find. So, in this first position, what is a little bit different about this position from the starting chess position? Well, let's see. Both kings look pretty normal. Both sides have about the same size army. But you might notice that instead of white having pawns on each of the 8 files, H pawn, G pawn, F pawn, E pawn, D pawn, C pawn, there are 2 B pawns. Now, of course, that is not illegal by itself. That happens a lot in chess when pawns capture. They create 2 pawns stacked up on top of each other. Happens all the time. So, why are the doubled pawns here not possible? Well, let's figure out what might have happened. This pawn on B3, the one I'm wiggling, he's nervous because he's about to get caught. If this pawn started on A2, which is really the only place it could have started, right? There had to be at least one A pawn begin on A2. Well, it could have captured something to land on the square B3. So far, everything seems fine. The pawn on A2 captured something on B3. We don't know what, but you know what? To be a good detective, you've got to look at all of the clues in the scene, which means looking at Black's pieces. Take a look at all of Black's army. Now, unlike when you're playing a live game on ChessKid and you see which pieces have been captured, I'm not being so nice today, okay? You are a senior detective. You need to figure some things out on your own. Take a look at Black's army. Black is only missing one piece. Can you figure out which one it is? Yeah, it's one of the bishops. And in fact, it matters which bishop. It looks to me that Black is missing the bishop that began on F8. Remember, you've got one bishop that begins on F8, one on C8, which means you've got one on the light squares, and clearly Black still has that bishop, right? You're looking right at it. And one that begins on the dark squares. In this case, the blue squares. I know I've made the blue red, but I've got special powers. So, what happened to this bishop that began on the dark squares? Well, obviously it got captured, right? Doesn't take a genius to figure that out. It's not there anymore. But how could a bishop on a dark square, which is the only piece that Black is missing, get captured on B3, which is a light square? I don't know either, and I think we just figured out our first position. This position is not possible in a chess game. It is against the rules because somehow the pawn on A2 landed on B3 via a capture, but no capture is possible. If I had removed any other Black piece, for example, this knight, right here, if I leave the chessboard, he's, well, not able to leave the board, but I can at least make him hide on the square H8.5. That knight could have gotten captured on B3, but the knight, of course, is on the board, so this position is not possible. Now you get a flavor of what we're doing today. All right, next position to my gumshoe detective. What is gumshoe anyway? Do I have a gum on my shoe? Yeah, I never understood that word. Okay, take a look at our chessboard here. Let it all absorb in. There's no double pawns this time, okay? So you're gonna have to think a little bit differently on this one. Why is this position absolutely not possible in chess? I'll bet you're figuring out this one. You might want to look at the kings because there are some special rules with the kings. Namely, when someone attacks your king, you're in check. You must get your king out of check on the next turn. If you take a look at the chessboard carefully, you'll see that Black's king is, of course, in check. Now, that by itself is totally possible. Maybe the bishop was on B5, and maybe it went to A6 to check the king. But the problem is, if that's the case, then that means that White left his own king in check. Notice the Black bishop's aiming at the White king, and it is actually never possible in a chess game for both kings to be in check. because in order for that to happen, you would have to leave your own king in check to deliver check to the other person, and you were in check first, so you broke the rules. Now, there are some really special positions where some kids think you can move a piece and put your own king in check as long as it put the other person's king in check, and that's actually not true. So an example of that would be if we move the knight there, which is not a very good move, but let's just say, and the black king were on this square. If it's white's turn, some kids think that this knight can capture the black knight, even though white's own king is now in check. Notice his bishop would be lined up with the king when this knight took, right? Because you're putting the other person's king in check, and that's not true, because you're essentially putting your own king in check first. And I know there's a popular video game that Funmaster Mike played when I was a little boy, where we had something called double KO, double knockout. You know what? That exists in video games, but it doesn't exist in the chess world. Okay, so going back to our starting position, this position is illegal, not allowed, because kings cannot both be in check unless, I don't know, you're a couple of 2-year-olds playing chess for the first time and you just don't notice. But on ChessKid, definitely our computer would not allow it. Position number 3. Wow. Much weirder than the previous one, if you ask me. Look at every element of this position. And I've put in a small trick, if you want to call it that. So in this position, what do you see? What do you see that's not normal? Well, I kind of made the trick of putting all the black pawns on light squares. It's the Great Wall of the Black Army. Do you know what, chess kids? That was just a trick. It was subterfuge, if you want to learn a high school word. There is nothing important about these pawns. It happens sometimes that all your pawns are on the same color, okay? So, poor bishop, right? That bishop's not going to get outside of his pawns, but that bishop can be sad. It can still be a possible position. So there's something else going on. And I'll give you a hint. You should, in fact, focus on the bishops. What's going on with those bishops? Well, this bishop's totally fine. You know, this pawn came forward, probably. This bishop came to the square d3. Or something weird could have happened. It could have gone here, here, here. It's unlikely, but it's possible. What about the other bishop? You might be thinking, but black doesn't have a dark squared bishop. That's true. Yeah, can't argue there. You might be thinking that white's threatening checkmate.
Hello.
Yeah, queen and helper mate. The queen sits on top of the king, and the queen has the protection of the bishop. And that's all true too. But the big question that I want to know, that everyone wants to know, how'd the bishop get here? Kids, how did the bishop get there? How did it happen? This bishop clearly began on the square c1. Oh, wait, Funmaster Mike. No, you are feeding me a line. It could have been a promoted bishop. Ooh, I love the creative thinking. And why am I talking to myself? Because that's what I have to do in my videos. Okay, so let's talk about all of these elements one at a time. First of all, could this be a bishop that was promoted to a bishop when a pawn gets to the other side? Let's hit the Wayback Machine. Remind the kids that when a pawn gets to the other side, even though you want a queen 99% of the time, you are allowed to get a rook, a knight, or a bishop. You can't get a king. All right. If I see 2 kings of the same color on the chessboard, I'm going to know you're just playing some games with Funmaster Mike. But take a look at the chessboard. I count all 8 pawns for white. Yeah, white's not missing any pawns. So promotion is impossible in this position. This bishop on d4 must have come from c1. But how did the bishop get from c1 to d4? The only way for that bishop on c1 to get active is for this pawn to move forward or this pawn to move forward. Neither of those pawns have moved, and so the bishop could not have gotten from c1 to d4. It's just that simple. It's not possible for this pawn to move forward, for the bishop to sneak out, and then the pawn to go backward. It just doesn't work that way. It is an impossibility. Just like Funmaster Mike eating ice cream every night. It is an impossibility. Actually, I suppose it is, but I would get very, very sick. So I'll think of a better example for my next video. This bishop could not have gotten to d4. That is the problem in this position. And if you figure that out, you are becoming a great chess detective. Moving on, and we're going to get a little bit harder. I don't know if you guys can get this one on your own. Maybe mom or dad gave you the iPad with this video queued up for you to watch. you might want to go back and get mom or dad's attention because this one might require some help. There's going to be some big numbers. I'll put it that way. Okay. Is it weird? Yes. But weird can still be legal. I mean, hey, I'm pretty weird, but I'm pretty sure that I exist. Okay, we've got a ton of pawns on the H file. Now, one pawn on a file is called a pawn. Okay, 2 pawns on the same up and down file is called doubled pawns. 3 pawns, tripled pawns. Now, that's actually happened to me in a chess game. 4 pawns I've never had in a chess game. That's called quadrupled pawns. 5 pawns on the same file, I don't think I've ever seen in a real chess game. I guess we'd call that Quin-coupled pawns. And 6 pawns on the same file, I don't know, my Latin is running out. We're just gonna call that a traffic jam because I don't know what else to call it. All right, so 6 pawns on the same file. Is it possible in a chess game? Well, I don't know, maybe. You're gonna have to figure out how those pawns got there. So let's take a look at how those pawns may have reached the H file. Okay, now this pawn clearly came from G2. There's no other pawn that could have gotten to the square H3, and it captures something, right? It made one capture to get from G2 to H3. Now, you might want to get pencil and paper out in case mom or dad was not available, because there's going to be some big counting. Now, this pawn had to have come from F2. It's the only pawn that could have reached H4, because remember, the G pawn on G2 went to H3. Normally, this pawn could go forward and capture, but this pawn, remember, it had to be the one to go to the square H3. So we've got 1 capture to get to H3, 2, 3 total captures. Now, I think you see where the pattern is going. The next pawn on H5 must have come from E2. It's the only possible square. So we've got 1 capture, 2 captures, 3 captures. Hey, this is starting to look like a weather report. We've got a nor'easter heading northeast, right? I'm not a very good weatherman, but yeah, you're going to want to bundle up because it looks like the cold front is blowing at 15 miles an hour. And for those of you in countries that use kilometers, well, that would be more, something like 25 kilometers. And there we go. Wow, it's a weather forecast. It's a math puzzle, but let's go back to chess because I'm definitely not qualified to do the other things. Okay, H6, how'd that pawn get there? You know where it began. It began on D2. So 1 capture, 2 captures, 3 captures, 4 captures. On the pawn on H7, I don't know how I got there. Actually, I do. It came all the way from C2. It went 1 capture, 2 capture, 3 capture, 4 capture, 5 captures. Now, you're going to have to count how many arrows I put on the cold front on the screen, because that's how many captures were made. Let's see, what's the easiest way to count the arrows? Let's count all of the captures that were made. The C2 pawn captured 1 piece on this square, 2, 3, 4, 5 captures to get there. The next pawn took this one, that'd be 6, 7, 8, 9 captures, 10, 11, 12 captures, 13, 14, and then 15 captures. There should be 15 arrows on the screen as well, but 15 captures are required to get this unbelievable traffic jam of pawns. So, if 15 captures were made, we might want to start looking at the black army. How many black pieces are missing? Well, I suppose we could count, but let's just think about how many black pieces start the chess game. Well, black has 2 full rows of pieces, right? The 7th rank is full of pieces. The 8th rank is full of pieces. So you can count, or you can do 8 plus 8, or you can do 8 times 2. But no matter how you run the numbers, black clearly starts with 16 pieces, but black still has 2 remaining on the board. And obviously you can never capture the king. I think we know that. So in this position, we can say that black has had 14 pieces captured, but white needs 15 captures to achieve the traffic jam of all traffic jams of pawns. So this position is not legal, and boy, we had to do some serious math to arrive at this answer. It might also be illegal for other reasons, like how did the black pawn on A7 get all the way over here to be captured in the first place? But remember, we don't even have to worry about that because the total number of pieces that need to be captured, 15, is 1 more than were actually captured, 14, and there we go. All right, bundle up because we've got a couple of storms remaining. Here we go. Chess Detective puzzle number 5. If you get this one right, I think that'd be slightly amazing, but you know what? You're starting to realize how tricky chess can be and how tricky Fun Master Mike can be. So let's see what's happening in this position. What do you notice that's extremely weird? Extremely weird. What do you notice? Now you're starting to get the hang of it. These 3 bishops are more than white usually has. But if you just stop there, if you say, hey, 3 bishops, end of story. Well, remember, we're getting close to the end of this YouTube video where the puzzles are supposed to get harder. It's a little bit harder than that. If you stop there, you get half credit. Remember, you can get more than your 2 starting bishops if you make a promotion. I wouldn't normally advise it, but technically you're allowed to. Now, white does have a pawn missing. Whatever white pawn began on A2 is gone from the chessboard. So something must have promoted. It could have been the A pawn. It could technically have been the B pawn that made a capture, and then the A pawn made a capture, and then the B pawn made a run for it. But no matter which pawn actually got to the other side, it definitely promoted on this square, or could have promoted on this square, because when it landed on A7, it could have captured something to get to B8. Now let's take a quick look at this position. If it captured something and it landed on B8, it would land on a dark square, and white has 2 dark square bishops. So you're thinking, hey, this position is legal because that's what happened. But wait a minute, you know but this moment to look at the black army. And what is black missing? I don't think black's missing anything. Black's got a king, black's got a queen, black's got the 2 rooks, black's got the 2 bishops, black's got the 2 knights, and black should have 8 pawns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So none of black's pieces have been captured, which means that the pawn must have promoted on the square A8. And if that pawn promoted on A8, it would promote to a light square. And how on earth could white possibly have 2 dark square bishops? Well, he can't. And that is exactly why this position is illegal. Now, I'm going to trick you even further. What if I had put this bishop on the light square? Would that make this position legal? You might think, well, yeah, Fun Master Mike, you just explained it. The pawn landed on A8, which is a light square. Now, white has 2 light squared bishops, and everything makes sense. Aha! But I've tricked you again. Because, okay, I have to release the bishop, so please forgive me, but we're going to pretend the bishop's on this square. If the pawn had promoted on A8, and white had selected a bishop, how did the bishop get back to the rest of the chessboard? It would have had to have gone through B7 or jumped over B7, and I don't even see how that's possible. So, funnily enough, no matter what colors the bishops are on, this position would be illegal. You might be thinking at this moment, Fun Master Mike, how is this going to make me a better chess player? Well, first of all, I'm exercising the creative part of your brain, which is pretty important in chess. Also, let's just say for a moment that you're playing a chess game with your BFF, and you get up to use the bathroom, and you come back, and you see something weird in the position. Don't you want to be able to prove to your best friend that he or she may have, doctored or altered the position while you're away? I'm not saying your BFF would do that. Also, chess is supposed to be fun. If you're not having fun right now, well, you're probably not trying, because for me, this is a ton of fun. Now, we get to our final position. And as I pull up this final position, I am going to say that I need to give some credit, because this position is not my invention. The first 5 were, but this one is not. This comes from a brilliant chess book that I read when I was a kid called The Chess Mysteries of Sherlock Holmes. And Sherlock Holmes is an actual detective. So this book posits that Sherlock Holmes is suddenly a detective solving chess mysteries. And it was written by a man named Raymond Smullyan, whose job was a logician. Yeah, not an electrician, a logician, somebody who just thinks logically all the time. Pretty weird job, but pretty awesome. And I loved this book when I was a kid, and I still love it to this day. Now, here is what Professor, because he was a college professor, Professor Shmulian had in his puzzle. He said, is this position legal? Now, notice I'm not saying the position is illegal, figure out why it's illegal. He's saying, could this position be legal? Okay, well, let's figure it out. First, I do want to say that it is White's move, okay? White's move in this position. So, if it's White's move in this position, what do we know? Well, we don't know much, but we do know that Black must have made the previous move. You might be thinking, Fun Master Mike, this is hardly a clue, but actually, we do have to think backward. And the process of thinking backward, we have a big word for. It's called retrograde. And whenever something is retro, that means you go into the past. Sometimes Fun Master Mike dresses retro, and my jeans, instead of being tight, have big flared bottoms, and your parents can tell you all about that time in the past. Okay, so we need to think into the past. If it's White's move now, it was Black's move on the previous turn. Well, what piece could Black have moved? Again, I know it seems pretty easy, but it must have been the king, right? It's the only piece he's got. Where did the king come from? Well, he could not have come from there or there because the two kings would be touching, and we know kings have stinky breath. That's not possible. The king must have come from the square H2. Okay, I'm going to get rid of some of these colors. I'm going to put a guy there, and I'm going to pretend the king moved down. So far, it seems pretty easy, right? The king was on H2, he moved to H1. But let's think. If the king was on H2, that means he would have been in check by the bishop. You might be thinking, okay, well, it's no problem, you know. White made some move to deliver check, and then the king moved to H1. But here's the big problem. Picture the king on H2. The bishop is checking the king. What move could White have made to get the bishop to the square B8? This is a tricky one. Now you're remembering that White could have promoted to a bishop, right? If the pawn was on B7 and it promoted to a bishop, then it would be check and the king moves to the square H1, okay? But in the chess mysteries of Sherlock Holmes, it's actually the idea that the position is inverted. It's turned upside down, meaning this pawn was actually going down the board and the numbers were wrong instead of the pawns going up the board. So if we were to turn the board upside down, it would look like this. Ta-da! The board is upside down. So now promotion, of course, is not possible because the pawn on B2 does not go backward to B1 if you are White to promote to a bishop. So the question is this position possible? Okay, well, remember, the king must have been on this square. The bishop was checking the king. What move could White have made to deliver this check? If the bishop had come from somewhere else on the diagonal, like for example E4, then the bishop would have already been checking the king and simply gone backward and still checking the king. Doesn't quite work that way in chess. And of course the bishop could not have come from the other diagonal because the pawn's there. The pawn is in the way from the bishop moving from A2 to B1. So you might think that this position is not possible. But wait a minute, it actually is. This is our only position of the whole day that is possible. You've got to figure out how did the crime, or in this case, the lack of a crime happen. You've got to figure out Black's alibi. How did the king get to H8? Have you thought of anything creative? I'm just going to sit here for a few moments while you ponder the existence of the history of this position. Wow, that was a long silence. If you need more time, you could pause your video now because I'm about to reveal the biggest mystery of the day. And if you like to solve puzzles, and as a chess player you should, go ahead and pause before I reveal the answer because it's coming in 3, 2, 1. Okay, here's the answer. The king clearly captured something. The king, well, you might say, why clearly, right? That's not so clear to me. Well, there could have been a piece on one of these squares that was blocking the check that moved out of the way to create a discovered check when the king was on H7. But there are no other white pieces on the chessboard. So clearly Black must have captured the white piece that was moving out of the way to create a discovered check. And so at the last couple of moves of the game, I'm going to hit the back button. The king must have captured a knight. And the only way for a piece to get to h8 but start out on one of these squares was for that knight to come from the square g6. And the knight would have had to have captured something to land on h8, or it actually could have captured a black piece on that square, or it could have just landed there the normal way. We know that the white king captured the knight. We don't actually know if the white knight captured something on h8 or if it just landed on an empty square, okay? But in my puzzle here, I pretended the knight captured something. We don't really know, but we do know the king must have captured the knight on the next turn. That's the only possibility. So this position is clearly possible. The knight either moved to h8 or captured the black king. That explains how the black king got to h7, explains how the bishop was just sitting there on b1 all along. The king captures, and this position is legal. Now, it'd be cool if you could promote backward to a bishop and create a very cool double bishop mate, but I'm afraid that white's gonna have to win in a different way by moving this pawn all the way up the board. Now, for you superstar advanced players who know what the term stalemate is, you've probably seen, you're probably already yelling at me through your iPad, but Master Mike, if you play a4, the king is not in check and it's stalemate, and there you go, our computer already announces it's a draw. White doesn't want a stalemate, you want to try to win the game. So in this position, if I were white, I would make a move that gives black a possible move, then I would throw the pawn up the board. So one possible move, and there are a couple, is just to move your king away. Now this king's got a couple of breathing spaces, and now the pawn will run up the board. And by the way, if you don't yet know what the term stalemate means, we have a great video of that on ChessKid. I advise you to watch it. All right, if you're ready for a career in the chess detective business, raise your hand. I think I can sense a couple of hands going up. This is mostly for fun, but thinking creatively is definitely a part of the chess experience. It's a great way to make your brain see things that you didn't know you could see. We'll come back later with more YouTube fun on ChessKid.